The Lakers play OKC again Tuesday night. The Clippers are off until Wednesday. Their 4-game winning streak has them in a tie for 5th place in the Western Conference with Golden State, Memphis, and Minnesota. The Connecticut women's basketball team had to beat USC and UCLA in the NCAA tournament before winning the national championship on Sunday. It was still a marvelous season for the USC and UCLA programs. Both teams were in the top 5 most of the season and put LA on the map in women's college basketball. UCLA was ranked number 1 in the nation for 14 weeks. USC and UCLA finished the season with a combined 65-7 record. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey, this is Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, and for over 20 years, Parkside Economic Development Corporation has served Leimert Park and surrounding communities, empowering tomorrow's leaders and changing lives. Parkside EDC has awarded over $400,000 in college scholarships while sharing economic principles of the Big Five of money with students and their families. Parkside EDC partners with organizations like the Brotherhood Crusade to assure our youth have the financial acumen to succeed. Parkside EDC provides families and businesses with financial insights, offering free online, on-site, and on-air B-Warp presentations. The Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Programs helps our community acquire, sustain, and pass down legacy wealth. High school seniors can apply for this year's scholarship awards at parksideedc.org. Scholarships will be awarded at Parkside EDC's Gospel/Jazz Brunch on Sunday, April the 27th. For details, tickets, or donations, please visit parksideedc.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
First things first, I'm the realest. Drop this and let the whole world feel it. Let them feel it. And I'm still in the murder business. I can hold you down like I'm giving lessons in physics. Right. You should want a bad bitch like this. Drop it low and pick it up just like this. Yeah. Cup of ace, cup of goose, cup of Chris. I heal something worth a half a ticket on my wrist. Taking all the liquor straight, never chase that. Never top like we bringing 88 back. What? Bring the hooks in where the bass at. Champagne spilling, you should taste that.
I'm so fancy. You already know I'm in
KBLA Talk 1580. Why is she playing that? Our conversation today is about code switching. Maybe code switching in reverse. Yeah. Well, welcoming in a guest I've never had a chance to talk to before while playing an artist I've never had occasion to play before. He's the executive director for the Center for Media Integrity of the Americas. He's a former U.S. ambassador dedicated to promoting greater mutual understanding between the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And the Center for Media Integrity is an independent entity meant to foster and incentivize high-quality journalism and public interest media in the Western Hemisphere. Boy, do you have your work cut out for you. Ambassador John Feely, welcome.
Thank you, Dominique. And yeah, I think we all got our work cut out for us today.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a pleasure to have you on. It's interesting because when you were ambassador to Panama, when the first time that our current president was elected, and you opted to step down at that point.
Yeah, I did. I had a real privilege of being a public servant, first as a Marine Corps officer, then as an ambassador. I wasn't an ambassador the whole time. My 30 years in the Foreign Service, you work your way up, you pay your dues. And I was sort of at what we consider the top of the career. And, we're a strange breed, Dominique. We sign on to implement American foreign policy overseas, even those policies with which we might disagree. And I had done that. I had had difficulties with a number of policies that the United States had, but I never questioned the underlying values behind them. I questioned the tactics. I questioned whether we should do certain things at certain times. But I could always kind of look at myself in the mirror and go, all right, I'm still serving the American people, even though I disagree with this president's particular decision at this particular time. That changed in 2016 for me. I listened to the campaign. I heard the current president's rhetoric about migrants. I heard an awful lot of things that, frankly, I'd heard a lot in my life before. I'm from New York, and I remember him from when he was a real estate developer, and I didn't like what I heard. But, I had sworn an oath to our Constitution, not to a man, but to a Constitution. But after Charlottesville, in August of 2017, I realized that my values weren't his values. I couldn't serve him, so the only thing I could do from an ethical point of view with my own moral compass was to resign. So I did, and it was a tough decision, but if I were faced with it today, I would do the same thing.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because I never thought about code switching in the context of being an ambassador or being, as you say, serving not just an ambassador. You were deputy chief of mission in Mexico City. You worked principal deputy assistant secretary for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. I mean, so you're going from country to country, culture to culture, and you have to be an effective communicator, maybe be convincing, be charismatic, be understood at the very minimum, right?
Absolutely. And, that's why I was really, really pleased and very grateful to you for the opportunity to have this conversation. Because I've long been fascinated by code switching, because what you just said is absolutely true. To a certain extent, to be a successful diplomat, you got to be able to code switch. Now, in the American vernacular, right, code switching comes out of the Black community. And I think code switching is very, or at least, maybe you'll correct me, but code switching, it's one, very much about language, but two, it's also about power relationships, right? People who code switch, people who change their language, change their diction, sometimes maybe even change their body language, right, often do so from a position of being, or perceived position of being powerless. And so what they do is they change that language to fit in with the powerful and then sort of see if that makes their communication more effective so they can advance their interests. That's my, very simplistic sort of generalization of how I've always perceived it. But I was in a position where, as an American diplomat working, in an American embassy in Mexico, in Colombia, in Panama, I showed up kind of with already a pretty strong measure of power. Right, the American people. And yet, I had to code switch to be effective to transmit what the American interests were. So, at the very basic level, right, I speak Spanish. But even there, the Spanish spoken in Panama is not the Spanish spoken in Argentina, is not the Spanish spoken in any other country. And so I would hear myself literally imitating what I heard in the streets, what I heard in, with my colleagues, my new colleagues in a new place. And when I first, it's a kind of a funny story, but when I first realized that there was like this kind of code switching thing going on, and it was unconscious in my mind, it was when I would watch Key and Peele. And I mean, dudes are funnier than anybody I've ever seen. And the epitome of that one was, I don't know if you remember the skit they used to do with Luther, Obama's anger translator. And it just sort of like stuck with me. Okay, how does somebody who already comes from a position of power, right? Because I know the history, or at least I've read the history. I haven't lived it, but I've read the history of, how coming out of the slave communities and Jim Crow and that, blacks will frequently change their language. What they speak in an office where they are a minority may not be what they speak at home, with their families. And you would see Key and Peele do this all the time. And, we always give comedians a little bit of a pass if they're funny, right? They can get away with stuff the rest of us can't say. But then I would look at myself and I would say, well, wait a minute, you kind of do this too. And how is that possible? And then the bigger issue is, how do people in power, and I'm talking about politicians in this particular moment, how do non-black and non-Hispanic politicians talk to those communities effectively in an effort to change the political dynamic where we find ourselves? And this isn't meant to be a political conversation, but you have a current president.
I think all conversations are political conversations, if you ask me, but okay.
Well, you may be right. You may be right. And you and I may dance around it, but sooner or later, the 800-pound gorilla is going to be in the room. But still, think about this. This is a man who is incapable of code switching. Right? Code switching requires a certain level of intelligence. I'm not talking about education, but just intelligence, right?
Exactly.
When I was a kid, you've got to be able to perceive power relationships. And you got to be able to perceive, like you can almost see Key and Peele, right? Having a good time on the street, speaking in their own vernacular, where they're comfortable. And then they walk into the office and immediately you see them whiten up. And, when they do it, it's very funny. But people do it all the time. I've seen people do it.
Of course. It's not just enslavement. It's just, if you want to have a job in America, we're being told we need to speak standard American English. And I started off our conversation playing a song by Iggy Azalea, who's an Australian girl who's made a whole bunch of money copying, code switching, I guess we could call it. And so, I also am interested in the ethics of that. Like, when is it cultural appropriation and when is it cultural competence? And I think, I don't know how fine a line it really is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, you just put your finger on it. That's exactly it. When do you get, quote unquote, permission to do it, right? Social permission. When is it an issue of appropriation? When is it just an issue of good communication? So take like a really concrete example, okay? We have a current president who's got current policies, and they ain't helping the black community. They ain't helping the Hispanic community. They're not helping any community in America. You're going to be paying $9 for a head of lettuce. You're going to be paying $6 for a dozen eggs. Nobody's happy with this right now, except for maybe the billionaires and the plutocrats. But if you are, let's say, a Midwestern white politician, right? Let's just take the governor of Kentucky, right? How does he speak to the black population? If he comes in and speaks in his own language, I think one of the fears is that it's going to be hard to penetrate. And they're going to hear him, and they're going to go, it's just another white politician talking what they think they want me to hear. And I know from the Hispanic community, where I do most of my media work in the States, that, they're getting a little bit torqued off with, some white guy or white gal showing up every 4 years going, si se puede, and thinking that they've made their code switch to effectively understanding the issues that confront the Hispanic community, whether it's in LA, whether it's in Miami or New York or whatnot. But if you try to code switch, or you try to use the language and, again, even the body language of a particular community that you're trying to reach, at what point do you do you turn them off with it because it becomes disingenuous?
Disingenuous and/or borderline racist, right? We're talking with John Feely, and I want to go a little deeper into that because if Andy Bashir shows up talking, Ave, African American vernacular English, it's not gonna go over good either. And yet, even Kamala Harris was criticized for supposedly using Ave on the campaign trail, even though that's what we all do. That's what, when I say we all, I'm talking about black people, consciously or unconsciously. We morph to be able to survive and thrive in various situations in the mainstream of America. Certainly interesting to think about how a world, a former U.S. ambassador, world traveler, does that from a one-up position instead of a one-down position. Continuing this conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580. Before the fire, Altadena was a real-life Wakanda. A thriving black oasis just 15 miles from downtown Los Angeles. 80% black residents were homeowners, building intergenerational wealth against the odds. It was a hub of black-owned businesses, churches, and cultural institutions. It stood as a symbol of black resilience and economic independence. Then, in a matter of hours, it was gone. The fire tore through homes, swallowed businesses, and left behind a painful void. But was it just an unstoppable act of nature, or was negligence involved? Did officials ignore early warning signs? Were the response efforts delayed or insufficient? What role, if any, did corporate or government failures play? Survivors are demanding answers. Don't miss our KBLA Talk 1580 Town Hall. The Eden Altadena Fire, 100 days and counting. On Wednesday, April 16th, 4 to 6 p.m. at the Robinson Park Recreation Center, 1081 North Fair Oaks in Pasadena. Join Dominique DiPrima, Nee Cordelai Corte, James Farr, Tavis Smiley, and a panel of survivors, community leaders, and experts as we commemorate Day 100 since the wildfires flared up. And we discuss where we go from here. It's KBLA's Eden Altadena Fire, 100 Days and Counting Town Hall, Wednesday, April 16th, 4 to 6 p.m. at the Robinson Park Recreation Center in Pasadena. Light refreshments to follow. Admission is free, but sign-up is required at our KBLA1580.com website. The first 100 attendees will receive a complimentary air purifier. This is a community call to action, brought to you by KBLA Talk 1580 and Quinn Emanuel Trial Lawyers. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
The IRS finally caught up with Louie.
I hadn't paid my taxes in 8 years. I owed the IRS a lot of money.
Louie was in deep trouble.
We're going to take your house, put a lien on your bank account, garnish your pay. They don't care. They're going to take your paycheck.
Louie found out about Optima Tax Relief, the leading tax resolution firm. A-plus rated by the Better Business Bureau, they've resolved over $1 billion for their clients.
Optima Tax, they help me. They calm me down. They make me feel comfortable, and I trust them.
Louie has a lot to be thankful for.
I don't owe the IRS anymore, and I'm able to live a comfortable life, a lot better life. It was because of Optima Tax.
For tax help you can trust, call Optima now for a free consultation. Take it from Louie.
If you owe the IRS, don't go it alone. Give Optima Tax a call. They can help you.
Call 800-919-9077. 800-919-9077. 800-919-9077.
Optima Tax Relief.
Testimonial from an actual client. Some restrictions apply. For complete details, please visit OptimaTaxRelief.com.
Thanks for waking up with Dominique DiPrima on KBLA Talk 1580.
And it's not just me you're waking up with. Happy to be in conversation with John Feely. He is former ambassador to Panama, executive director for the Center for Media Integrity of the Americas. So you talked about Andy Bashir, the governor of Kentucky, and how he might not be able to connect with black voters or Latino voters if he just did his regular speech
White
patterns.
guy shtick.
Yeah, his speech patterns, his body language, all of that. And certainly you mentioned that you speak Spanish and you know many cultural nuances of different countries. So you were able to use that to your advantage as an ambassador in being culturally competent in reaching folks. I would argue that if Andy Bashir suddenly started speaking Ave and trying to, quote unquote, act black, people would reject that as being racist or stereotypical or at the very
100%.
least disingenuous. Right?
100%. No, I totally agree with you, Dominique, and that's why I'm kind of interested in drilling down on that point. So the first thing I got to say is, you didn't have to define Ave for me, but it's a really good thing that you did, because outside of your listeners at KBLA, I'm pretty sure that if I took that term to most of my friends here on the East Coast, and certainly my white friends, they wouldn't really know what it is. So if you look at African American vernacular, right? I don't know if you know the linguist John McWhorter. He's written a lot and gotten a lot of great coverage, and I find him one of the most interesting people to read, because I'm a diplomat. I'm fascinated by language. So much of language is what I did for about a 30-year career. So let's take Andy Bashir, right? And there are black people in Kentucky, and he speaks to them, and they vote for him, and presumably, at the end of the day, voters are going to vote their interests, right?
Right. We're voting policy, not accents, hopefully.
Exactly. Hopefully. But you and I both know, right? What is it that Donna Brazile and Kamala Harris said, get your sister and get two more sisters and go vote, right? We talk to each other. We WhatsApp each other. And we use our vernacular. We use our language, whatever that may be. And yet, I think you said it. I don't think it's an opinion. I think it's absolutely fact that if Andy Bashir starts to speak Ave, it's going to be a disaster for him, because he's not being genuine. And all politicians, the criticism of all politicians is that, they're lying to you somehow. They're not telling you the truth. And so he's got to be genuine. But think of this. When Andy Bashir goes into a deep hollow somewhere in Appalachia, Kentucky, I guarantee you his voice and his language gets a little bit more Appalachian.
Yeah.
The biggest one, one of the amazing things about Ave is if you listen to a Southern accent today, and my very hardest foreign service tour was being a kid from the Bronx in New York and being stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was 22 years old, and I thought I'd been sent to Mars on one of Elon Musk's rockets. And I started to hear Southern accents that could they were thick as molasses, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. And it was really hard for me not to slip a y'all in there every once in a while. And if you ever want to hear, something that sounds totally confused and inappropriate, think of Tony Soprano using the word y'all. Right. It's just not genuine. And yet, Andy Bashir does do that. And it works for him. And I think, and this is the sort of issue I wanted to drill down on and unpack with you, is it's because he's white. And so he can get away. When he's in the Congress of the United States, or when he's up doing the rounds looking for money in Washington, he probably doesn't use a lot of y'alls. But when he goes and he talks to his constituents in a rural backwater, in creeps a little bit of y'all, or in creeps a little bit of golly, I had no idea.
Right, because he's trying to say I'm one of you, and he's talking to his base. But here's the thing, Ambassador Feely, when Iggy Azalea does it, she makes tons of money, and it's almost like verbal blackface. When Jack Harlow does it, he goes platinum. And so maybe Trump can't do it. He couldn't do it even if he tried, because he wouldn't know how to do it. But maybe those that do know how in politics can't get away with it. But it's clearly something that's happening in what we call reverse code switching. So my question is, when is it when is it cultural competence and when is it cultural appropriation? Where's the line?
And I don't think I have a good answer for you. It's the exact same thing I'm struggling with. But here's the reason why I felt our conversation was going to be important and interesting, because we're in a position right now. This is my personal opinion. I don't speak for the Center for Media Integrity or anyone else. My personal position is that the current president is a complete disaster for the United States, and we're all in a bad place, and we're going to be in a worse place. And for KBLA listeners who have 401ks, don't look at them. For those who don't have a 401k, you're not going to want to put any money into it for a while. We're back at a point here where he's going to continue with tariffs. Things are going to get more expensive, and we're going to have people putting money under the mattress again. The people who are going to try to get those votes, right? And we know that more black people in America voted for Donald Trump in 2024 than they did in 2020.
Right, although it's still a small number. Let's keep it in perspective. I mean, 92% would be considered a landslide in any other community. 82 or 85, depending on who you listen to, a black man is still a landslide. On the we voted against Trump in larger numbers than anybody else. To be clear,
absolutely, right. Absolutely. But the game here in our politics is a game of 1%. Okay, the guy he took the popular vote by 1.3%.
Yeah,
I think. Well, okay, so we are talking about granular level retail politics. So how do you get to those people and do it in a way that's genuine, but that also says, look, I'm not from your community. I'm not, but I'm looking for your vote because I want to help your community. But this guy got their vote and didn't code switch because, as you say, he's not capable of it because code switching requires a certain level of emotional intelligence, which I think he probably has a pretty low quotient. And that's the conundrum. And I guess I'm asking, not because I'm running for anything, I don't want to run for office, but I want to see the midterm elections turn out as a resounding rejection of him. And I do think that even though you're 100% right, it's a small percentage, how do you get those few who defected? And I'm thinking the same question, and I've actually had this conversation with a couple of folks in the Spanish-speaking community in the United States, where because of what I did, I can appreciate the subtle cultural differences between the Miami Cuban, the Texas Mexican American, the Colombian American who recently migrated, to San Francisco or New York. There are differences there, and all those people, just like any constituent and any voter, want to hear the messages in a way that is most immediately graspable, intelligible, and relevant for them.
We're talking with John Feely, former U.S. Ambassador to Panama, Executive Director, Center for Media Integrity of the Americas. We'll answer that question after news, traffic, and sports, only right here.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 things you should know with BIN News. Severe weather has caused at least 19 deaths, including a Missouri man swept away by floodwaters. Heavy rain is expected to continue, shifting to the southern mid-Atlantic and southeast. Over 1 million people protested against President Trump on Saturday with rallies in all 50 states and globally. We're not going back! We're not going back! Organizers demanded an end to the billionaire takeover, cuts to federal programs, and attacks on marginalized communities. U.S. stock futures fell about 4% Sunday after a rough week on Wall Street. The Dow had back-to-back losses of over 1,500 points, and the S&P dropped 6% Friday, the worst since March 2020, amid concerns over President Trump's tariffs and a potential global trade war. And legendary singer Chaka Khan announced a soon-to-be-released album of music co-written with Prince. Despite delays, the album is now cleared for release, though no specific date has been given. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice. Continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers rode into Oklahoma City and put a beat down on the team with the NBA's best record. The Lakers dominated OKC with a surprising 126-99 win. 30 points and 6 assists for Luka Doncic. LeBron had 19 points and 7 assists. The Lakers play OKC again Tuesday night. The Clippers are off until Wednesday. Their 4-game winning streak has them in a tie for 5th place in the Western Conference with Golden State, Memphis, and Minnesota. The Connecticut women's basketball team had to beat USC and UCLA in the NCAA tournament before winning the national championship on Sunday. It was still a marvelous season for the USC and UCLA programs. Both teams were in the top 5 most of the season and put LA on the map in women's college basketball. UCLA was ranked number 1 in the nation for 14 weeks. USC and UCLA finished the season with a combined 65-7 record. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hi, I'm Dominique DiPrima, and it's almost time to celebrate KBLA's 4th anniversary, coming up Juneteenth 2025. We'll be marking the achievement with 4 key community events, including a special symposium, luncheon, and brain trust hosted by me entitled The State of Black Women in Los Angeles. Keep it locked here for details on how to join us for this groundbreaking symposium examining the unique challenges, triumphs, and contributions of Black women in Los Angeles in the areas of education, healthcare, community leadership, cultural and political contributions. This public convocation will provide a critical forum to address the specific social, economic, and political realities facing Black women in LA today. We'll go live with a radio broadcast and YouTube live stream, a public discussion, and a private dialogue with some of LA's most impactful women. It's an affirmation of Black women standing at the intersection of race and gender in times of adversity while demonstrating remarkable resilience and leadership. We will listen and we will speak out and be heard, all in service of finding opportunities and solutions. Please plan to join us in celebrating our 4th anniversary by amplifying the voices of Black women. For more on our symposium and 4 events celebrating 4 years on the air, simply stay tuned or keep an eye on KBLA1580.com and help make this Juneteenth more jubilant with all of us at KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you that we keep us safe. Every girl deserves a chance to shine. That's the belief behind Forgiving for Living, Inc. Since 1999, this organization has been empowering at-risk girls ages 13 to 18, helping them overcome behavioral and mental health challenges. Founder Wendy Gladney's personal journey inspired the mission to give girls hope and purpose through the power of forgiveness. Through their ambassador program, workshops, and annual conference, Forgiving for Living has touched over 3,000 young lives, providing mentoring, life skills, training, and tools for building self-esteem and confidence. You can make a difference. Visit forgivingforliving.org to donate, volunteer, become a mentor, or find help for a young girl in need. Forgiving for Living, Inc., building brighter futures for young girls. Visit forgivingforliving.org today. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Find a righteous rage and don't be afraid to say what you see. We're KBLA Talk 1580.
And we're talking with former U.S. Ambassador to Panama, Executive Director of Center for Media Integrity of the Americas, John Feely, and you are invited into the conversation at 800-920-1580, or you can tap in with our YouTube stream, which is KBLA 1580 at youtube.com. There is always a conversation going on in the comments. Kwamel Allah says, Black folks across America say y'all, and the internet amplifies Black Trump voters. B. Bell of Bad Dog Bullies says, are we talking Ebonics here? I guess that Ave is another term for Ebonics, maybe an updated term. But what I will say to what we kind of were talking about before, news, traffic, and sports, is how do Democrats or anyone with a fair chance of opposing the current agenda, the current, what I call new Confederate MAGA Republican administration, the authoritarian streak that we see coming out in our country right now. How do they reach the black voters or the Latino voters, where we saw a significant shift of Latino voters toward this Republican Party of today? And one hopes that it is policy over language. I also think there's a broad distrust. The conservatives call it the uniparty, and I think some on the left call it the duopoly. I mean, it's they think that they're basically the same. That Dems and Republicans are corporate sellouts that don't care about people, only care about property. And when we look at, I saw Ta-Nehisi Coates on Instagram breaking down how Democrats keep losing, and then they continue to want our loyalty. Where are the wins, particularly for the progressive wing of the party, which is the strongly involved BIPOC wing, black and BIPOC wing of the party? That's where the energy is. The Dems seem to just want to give it lip service and then run from it back to the center and hang out with Liz Cheney and, not super serve their base. And I think that goes beyond language,
Yeah, you may be right about that. I mean, again, you and I said at the outset we didn't want it to be an explicitly political conversation, but you can't avoid it these days, right? Listen, I think in terms of language, I think we all just saw something, and I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. We all just saw something here last week that attests to the very power of language. Senator Cory Booker got up and set the record for a continuous speech. And, you know what he did, and I'm sure most of our listeners this morning know what he did. But listen to the man's voice, and it gets to exactly what I'm talking about. I know that as a white guy who has been blessed in his life by a whole bunch of escalators of achievement, right? I was born into as I always say, a dysfunctional, functional family. Everybody was, okay? We all got our youth story. But then I went into institutions. And I was a Boy Scout. Then I went into, I got a good education. I was educated by Jesuit priests who are marvelous. They sound terrible, but these are like the most open, mind-blowing guys who challenge you to think critically for yourself. Then I was in the Marine Corps, where they don't challenge you to think for yourself at all. Then I joined the State Department. I've always been in organizations that were hierarchical and that had very clear rules of advancement. And a lot of people, most people in America, don't have that background. But here I sit as a 63-year-old grandfather, and I listen to a man like Cory Booker, who was born to much tougher circumstances than me in New Jersey. And I listened to his rhetoric, his language, and it was truly inspiring. Now, he inspired me not because he's a black man. He inspired me because he spoke about democracy. He spoke about e pluribus unum. But I wonder, and I ask you, because I don't have the criteria to judge this, at times he spoke much more to my ear, and I probably listened to a good 4 or 5 hours of it. He spoke to my ear almost like, an AME preacher. And I could almost sort of like see him reaching to feel for people, to get motivated, to care about this country, to still bet on the country, even though there may be a pervasive feeling that both parties have become corporate, that BIPOC people really don't have a home, or the only home politically that they have may be a very shrill home that doesn't necessarily win elections, right? That's the Ta-Nehisi Coates thing. It's also James Carville out of, Louisiana, the ultimate non-code switcher. That guy couldn't have a thought that wasn't in Southern vernacular, and yet he says, Democrats, you got to just completely rethink things. So I don't know at what point individual politicians are going to, in the Democratic Party or in the non-Trump part of the Republican Party, which, quite frankly, and this is a personal opinion, I don't think exists anymore. I think the only people who are left in the Republican Party are twizzlings who have been intimidated into buying into the agenda, or true believers who believe in a white theocratic America, which is certainly something I fundamentally reject and will work to defeat.
Yeah. Well, a lot said there. When we go back to the question of language, I felt like when I was watching Cory Booker, or Senator Cory Booker, I should say, I felt like he was channeling his ancestors. I felt like he was reaching for our roots in order to invoke the spirit of resistance, the spirit of change, the moral conscience that Black America has been to America and to the world. I felt like he, because Cory Booker is a very, he's an Ivy League educated brainiac. He is the ultimate code switcher. He knows how to make everybody comfortable. And that's really the persona that he generally presents. I feel like what happened during that speech was, for me, it was him contacting his strength through his ancestors to try to connect us to a spirit of resistance, of resilience, and of moral certitude that has been, the hallmark of Black American resistance.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, and I appreciate the observation because, like I said, I can only surmise that, right? Because I don't have that kind of ancestral root that Black Americans do. But as somebody who's just studied history, I can obviously look back on the span of almost 250 years and see the repeated episodes in our history where the Black community, or even just migrants at different times, my grandfather, an Italian immigrant, was called the N-word in New York at the turn of the last century because he was very, very dark and swarthy. And so you see that and this is why the strength of the United States, what I basically sold overseas for 30 years, and I genuinely believed it, and I still believe it now, was this e pluribus unum. But the rejuvenating source of America has always been the powerless. And the powerless have always been recent immigrants and the Black community. Black community because of the historical sin of America that starts in slavery, the repeated episodes where Blacks go and, the Red Tails in World War II. I'm an old pilot, so I'm fascinated by the Tuskegee Airmen. But you can go, you know them better than I do, so I don't need to list them, where promise made, promise not fulfilled, and you keep struggling. And Cory Booker kept struggling through hours 17, 18, up to 25. And I thought it was actually just sort of like, because I'm a New York Mets fan and we're perpetual underdogs, or actually we're perpetual favorites, always like underdogs. I loved that the guy he beat, the record in the United States Senate, was Strom Thurmond.
Right.
Because that's the America that I didn't represent, and none of my colleagues represented for decades of service, where, hey, nobody's perfect, no country's perfect, no democracy is perfect, but you aspire, and that's what I saw Cory Booker doing.
E pluribus unum, out of many one. Now, we are talking with John Feely, former U.S. ambassador to Panama, and currently the executive director of the Center for Media Integrity of the Americas. Continuing our conversation. When we come forward, we're talking about code switching. A few other things have crept in. Code switching, competence, cultural competence versus cultural appropriation. KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward. At Exquisite Family Mortuary, We know how overwhelming it can be planning a meaningful farewell for your loved one. Secure your peace of mind by calling Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. From traditional funeral services to memorials to direct cremation, pre-needs, and more. Call Charlotte White at Exquisite Family Mortuary for Southern hospitality in Southern California. That's Charlotte White at 323-577-5562. Exquisite Family Mortuary is located nearby in Inglewood, California. Exquisite Family Mortuary, where your loved one becomes our loved one.
I feel so alone.
I'm embarrassed to talk about it.
How can I help my kid if I can't help myself?
I can't remember when I wasn't stressed.
I don't like it inside.
When you feel overwhelmed by your thoughts and emotions, it's okay to get help. You are not alone. CalHope is here for you with free, safe, and confidential mental health resources for youth, young adults, families, and you. Find support now at calhope.org.
Time is up. The IRS is in full collection mode for 2024, issuing liens, levies, and garnishments to anyone who has a past tax debt or unfiled tax returns. Don't wait till it's too late. Your paycheck and bank accounts are at risk of being seized. Call now and stop the collection process today. If you're living check to check, no matter how much you're making, you still may qualify for the Fresh Start programs offered by the IRS to reduce or even eliminate your tax debt. It's just a 5-minute call to get your options, and it's free. If you owe back taxes, have years of unfiled tax returns, under audit, have a wage or bank levy, or finally just want to sleep better, business or personal, call the experts at Republic Tax Relief while there's still time. A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, and tough. This veteran-owned company has the fight you need to take on the IRS. Don't go at it alone. The call is free. Call their hotline number now, 800-246-1923. That's 800-246-1923. Find out if you qualify today. Call 800-246-1923 or go to republictaxrelief.com.
After producing an award-winning climate justice campaign in 2024, KBLA Talk 1580 has gone all in on its 2025 Climate Justice plus Black Health Initiative. April is Minority Health Month, and Urban Family Focus in partnership with Providence Health Systems presents The Heart of the Matter. Providence doctors and health equity officers will participate in informative and life-changing conversations on hypertension, health equity, behavioral health, and community engagement. Don't miss these empowering conversations on Urban Family Focus every Saturday in April at 7 and Sunday at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sponsored by Providence, Southern California's largest and most comprehensive health care network. We've got a lot to talk about on KBLA Talk 1580. Download the KBLA 1580 app or log in to KBLA1580.com. I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. On KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
Okay, I do have some more questions here on our code switching conversation, but I cannot let you, John Feely, former U.S. Ambassador to Panama, get out of this conversation without at least mentioning something about what happens if we actually try to take the Panama Canal, which I'm laughing to keep from crying right now because that just seems like 10 kinds of crazy to me. And I don't claim to be an international diplomat, but I just know you just can't go take people's stuff. Like, we're going to take Greenland. Sorry. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah, that. Look, this is not okay. First of all, Donald Trump has, and that rats, I just blew it. I was going to promise myself I wasn't going to say his name. The current president. All right, don't worry. I just, we all play.
Well, I call him he who shall not be named, so I get it.
The current president of the United States has, and I've said this before in a number of venues, I don't believe he's a very educated man. But I also think that means that a cellar core to elites on the East Coast or in, San Francisco, we got to be careful not to confuse what a formal education is with a reptilian intelligence for survival and for power assessments. And I think there he actually has a very highly developed intelligence. He understands how to read power situations. And the way in which he uses language, now you talk about a guy who's not capable of code switching. There was a study I recently read about, I think it was done at the University of Pennsylvania or somewhere, I may have the details wrong, where a bunch of AI guys took a whole bunch of his language, dumped it into a big gonculator, and crunched out the conclusion that the current president speaks with a third grader's diction. Okay, so anybody who ever gets on the black community for speaking Ebonics, and sort of whips out the old school marm, well, your subject verb or doesn't match, or you're using an adjective where it should be an adverb. This guy speaks with a third grader's diction, and it yet has an incredible ability to do a lot of things. One, motivate a base. Two, create purposeful obfuscation. So what she said about Panama, we're going to take back the canal. Most people hear that and they go, what, are we going to invade? So let me just say right now, we're not going to invade. Donald Trump doesn't have the votes to invade. You know who fight foreign wars in places most Americans can't find on a map? The sons and daughters of MAGA voters. He ran on a campaign not to get us out of foreign wars. He's not going to go and invade Panama, even though the American military could do it. The power asymmetry, the military asymmetry between you. Panama doesn't even have a military. They have a police force.
Wow.
But what he means by this is he's concerned about the Chinese commercial expansion, the fact that they operate 2 out of 5 ports. Frankly, I'll be very honest, when I was there, I was concerned about Chinese commercial expansion. But the way he's gone about this is very consistent with his mob boss, Tony Soprano, intimidation tactics. So today, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is actually in Panama, and there's going to be a lot of what always accompanies any Trump engagement. He says something, he puts it out there, it's not 100% clear. He may be code talking as opposed to code switching. He may be code talking to people, like his famous wink and nod to the Proud Boys, and when he said "stand back and stand down," or "stand down and stand back."
Right.
But he purposely creates that confusion so you don't know, and then, human nature being what it is, people go to the rumination corner of the room and go, oh my God, he must mean we're invading. I don't mean to, I don't want to minimize the insulting threat that this is to Panama. It's a very small country. There are a lot of things, to include tariffs, that Donald Trump could decide to do to Panama that they really don't have much of a defense against, but it's not going to involve, at least nothing I've seen so far indicates that it's going to involve American blood and treasure, the daughters and sons of all Americans who served bravely in the military.
Yeah. Well, it's well said. Speaking of China, he's now threatening them with another 50% tariffs by tomorrow if they don't take off their 34% hike. And this is what a trade war looks like. But back to our basic conversation about code switching. I think Hillary Clinton famously lost a lot of ground in the black community when she said she keeps hot sauce in her purse, because it felt like it didn't feel true. It felt, to your point, disingenuous. So it's
totally,
it's not just language, it's behavior. And I think this idea that Democrats are the same as Republicans or just as bad, it leads to people being more vulnerable to believing and misinformation. So I'm not quite sure where the code switch happens. I think it's going to have to be, they're going to have to find someone that can be genuine in the space.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I do believe a lot of this comes down to authenticity. That said, I think there also has to be kind of a recognition. As much as I personally would like to believe that skin color or ethnicity is not involved here. If you go back and you look at the origins of code switching, I firmly believe, from what I've read of John McWhorter and others, that there are power relationships involved in this. So when Hillary Clinton says that, or, if, a white male politician says, I'm going to grab my gat and take it to him, it's going to just clank, it's going to sound completely dishonest and not genuine. So I think there has to be a recognition that there are people who can code switch. First of all, you have to have the intelligence to do it. But Senator Cory Booker is one. I think a lot of black politicians can do it. I think, and this is just my personal observation, as somebody who watched and campaigned, quite frankly, for Kamala Harris, I don't think she did it very well at all. I think that when she tried to get more black, she got more criticism out of the black community, and then Donald Trump famously jumps on it again with that kind of reptilian intelligence. He goes, "When did she become black?"
Well,
I didn't know she was black.
But Donald Trump was pre-minted, from his Studio 54 days, from the Golden Potty and the Supermodel Girlfriends. He was pre-minted in a way that other politicians weren't. He doesn't have to code switch because he was a cultural icon.
Yeah, an icon might be a little too complimentary.
It's a disgusting icon, but it's still an icon.
Yeah, no.
I mean, Scarface is an icon, right? It's that kind of icon, cartoon character.
You're 100% right. He had that notoriety. Hey, and listen, I got to slip one thing in here, Dominique, before we go, and it's going to be an ask of your producer. And I don't want to end the conversation, but I know you're going to kick me off at some point. I heard some of the best news earlier while I was listening to the ads in between our conversation. That Shaka Khan is coming out with a new album. Yes. So I'm going to ask you to do my outro music with Shaka Khan. Okay. If you could play Ain't Nobody or I Feel For You or something that comes
Miles
from
is all over it. He's already pulled it up. It's done. We are out of time. Tell us how to follow you, how to keep up with your writings and the things that you're doing now.
That's so sweet of you. The fact is, I lurk on social media. I got trolled pretty harshly when I left.
Yeah.
And it's just not worth it for me. But I will tell you that and the Center for Media Integrity is separate and apart from my personal opinions about American politics. We just promote good, fact-based, high-quality journalism in Latin America and the Caribbean. But I am going to be doing an event that here in Washington, D.C. at a great place called Busboys and Poets. And the title of the event is Wait, We've Seen the Movie Before. And I'm going to be with a couple other American ambassadors, all career people like me. And we've worked on or served in and know the stories of other countries that went from democracies to dictatorships.
Great.
So I will get with Miles after this and get that to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Tavis Smiley's up next. He's got a great show teed up for you. Like my mama used to say, history is now, and we're making it together. Until tomorrow, one love.